In June of this year, when Gabby Petito ended up with injuries on her back, did anybody ask any questions? Well, they're sure asking them now. Hey folks, welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm here in Latvia. This week I had the opportunity to jump on Court TV with Vinnie Politan to look into the case of Abby Petito and Brian Laundrie and injuries that mysteriously have shown up on her back. We found this video just a while ago. I think you're going to be interested in this segment.
I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And this hour, we're going to take a look at what's happening in the search for Brian Laundrie, also the investigation of this entire case. And the way I want to do it is put together a little bit of a timeline and break down things that are happening at different points of Gabby and Brian's trip and where they were and what they were doing and what we can glean from all of that. So let me bring in tonight's guests. Joining us tonight, Long Island, New York, former commander with the United States Marshal Service who ran the New York and New Jersey Regional Fugitive Task Force for the past 3 decades, Lenny DePaul's back with us. And joining us tonight in Latvia, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King is with us. Great to see you, Mike. All right, thanks for joining us while you're away on business in Latvia. Let's start, and I want to start this timeline in mid-June, okay? This is when Gabby and Brian begin this cross-country road trip. 2 people living the van life and living it very publicly by posting on Instagram and on YouTube. And that was the whole purpose of it, was to have this incredible adventure, share it together, and document it, right? You put it all together, and I think Gabby is trying to build a website and trying to build a social media presence and a brand. And I mean, a lot of people are doing that. I mean, the Profiling Evil podcast is doing it on YouTube prolifically. So that's part of what they were doing. Now, I want to fast forward now to July 10th, okay? July 10th, Gabby posts some pictures and videos tagged at the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve in Colorado, okay? So they're surfing these sand dunes. Again, amazing adventure. I want you to take a look at a still image from this sand surfing video, okay? My friend, death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, pointed this out to me today. You look at her right shoulder, and maybe it's the lighting, maybe it's not the lighting, but there are potentially some marks on that right shoulder. This is July 10th, okay? The trip started in mid-June, so it's like a month into the trip. You know, it could be a bruise, and you could get a bruise many different ways, but from my perspective, I think this is part of this investigation at this point. Lenny DePaul, your thoughts about that image?
Well, thanks again for having me. And you know what? Let's go back a little bit. You got 2 people that get engaged, right? Apparently they're in love. They decide to get engaged. I guess COVID prevented them from getting married. They take off on this trip. They're Florida. They come back here to Long Island, and then they head west. Could that be the sign of some sort of abuse? Absolutely. I mean, that could be anything. I see her. You know, she's falling down a side of a hill now with a surfboard. I mean, that's pure speculation. Can't rule it out, though, knowing what we know now. That's for sure.
Mike King, and it's something that I think of, you know, when they're doing the autopsy, one of the things you also look for are older injuries as well, and whether there's any evidence of other injuries as you put together the case to try to figure out how and why Gabby Petito died.
Yeah, and this is a great case. I mean, Joe Scott is such a pro, and I loved hearing the fact that he had weighed in on that. This is a death investigator who looks out and sees things that sometimes the rest of us miss. But we have to keep in mind, this is an active young woman, and those could be artifacts of a fall or many other things. But as we start to see this history kind of unfold, we see the Moab incident, we see now the fact that she died of a violent homicide, or at least that's what's being reported. all of a sudden you got to take these things with a lot more weight and consider if there is something to that.
And start put together the pieces of what was going on between these two, what's going on in that van and in the relationship. Okay, you mentioned it. Let's move our timeline forward now from July 10th to August 12th. And this is, we've talked a lot about this. This is Gabby and Brian stopped by police in Moab, Utah, following 911 calls where people witnessed violence. And the callers were saying that he was hitting her. Let's take one more listen to Gabby speaking to police on the side of the road in Utah.
Well, to be honest, I definitely hit him first.
Where'd you hit him?
I slapped him in the face.
You slapped him first? And then just on his face?
When you get to him, just shut up.
How many times did you slap him?
Romeo, India, Alpha.
Just a couple.
And then what? And then his reaction was to do what?
Grab my arm until I wouldn't slap him.
He just grabbed you?
Yeah.
Did he hit you though? I mean, it's okay if you're saying you hit him, and then I understand if he hit you, but we want to know the truth if he actually hit you.
I guess, yeah, but I hit him first.
All right, say what you want. To me, it's clear there's domestic violence taking place, and so much so that people who saw it. The thing that makes me think that this was not the only time, Lenny, was that this was in public. Like a lot of times these things happen behind closed doors, but for this violence to manifest itself outside of the Moonflower Co-op, where people are seeing it and people are reacting to it, to me that's kind of scary. If you're in a state of mind where you think you can kind of do this.
Right. Is it something they were used to? I mean, I hate to say that, but, that second body cam video, is a pretty good vantage point where you get to hear Gabby, you get to see Gabby. I mean, she does admit that she slapped him first, but she was noticeably, she was scared. I mean, I don't know if she was scared because maybe they were going to lock him up or her, but, neither one of them wanted to press charges. But here's what I found interesting about that car stop. Those police officers, they were there for over an hour. I mean, 1 hour. That's a long time. I mean, I get it. It was a judgment call. They separated him, put him in a hotel room for the night and so on. But, there's a lot of people Monday morning quarterbacking this car stop. But, I felt that over an hour, the Q&A and that they did, the separation that went on, I thought they did a good job.
Mike, one thing that was pointed out, and we got to see it more clearly in the second body cam that was finally released last week, she did have some marks on her face. And the officer was noticing something on one of her cheeks and also on her arm. And again, what exactly is going on here in this relationship? But to me, that tells me that there's some level of violence happening. To what extent? Who's the aggressor? To me, still isn't clear about this incident. But then you can't forget that she died at the hands of another. It's a homicide.
Yeah, I think that's what's really troubling, and probably the best reason that we need to really consider this kind of change that we're going through in government, where we're talking more about getting mental health providers involved in these things. Cops are trained to do one thing, resolve a problem and move it on to the next step. And I agree, these officers spent an hour at the scene. They were asking, they couldn't get the elements that they needed to put a charge on one of them. They were going to charge her anyway and force them to go into the court system the next day. But they were up against a real hard spot as well. And I think, Vinny, this is the perfect reason why it makes sense to have a mental health provider that could come out and dig a little deeper. That Parks officer, the female officer, tried to get more information from Gabby, speaking woman to woman. She has indicated how terribly difficult it was to get information. And frankly, all of the evidence was pointing to the fact that they had both people that could have been arrested for assault.
Now, let's get back to the timeline, moving forward from August 12th to August 17th now. And this is something that we're learning. And this kind of struck me. Brian travels from Salt Lake City, Utah to Tampa on the 17th of August. And then on August 23rd, travels from Tampa back to Salt Lake City to rejoin Gabby. Here's what we learned from the Laundrie family attorney. Gave us the statement that Brian flew home to Tampa from Salt Lake City on August 17th, returned to Salt Lake City on August 23rd to rejoin Gabby. To my knowledge, Brian and Gabby paid for the flights as they were sharing expenses. Brian flew home to obtain some things and empty and close the storage unit to save money as they contemplated extending the road trip. And we had heard some rumors that he had flown back home. We didn't know the timing of it, but now it's 5 days after the Moab incident and about 10 days before we believe Gabby is killed. Mike King, what do you take away from this new trip that he takes by himself, leaving her by herself in Utah?
Yeah, this has troubled me since day one. Number one, I still want to know if he actually made the trip from Moab to Salt Lake with Gabby in that van after the assault happened, or it very likely could be that he jumped on a plane in Moab. It would have to go through Salt Lake City to get him home, and that if there was some kind of reconciliation, and now all of this is just fabricated story to justify why they're going home. The trouble I'm having with this, Vinny, is if the reason to fly home is to clear a storage unit, holy cow, that's an $800 or $900 airplane ticket to go clean a storage unit. They could have kept that thing for 6 more months, I would think, before that bill equalized. So that's kind of troubling. And if it was a matter of he needed a couple of personal items to bring back, shipping's pretty darn cheap, a whole lot less than an airplane ticket. So that whole thing still needs to be vetted out.
Yeah, Lenny, maybe he could have sent his parents. I mean, they got that nice camper. They could have emptied that storage unit, put everything in the camper.
I'm with Mike. I mean, I agree totally. It's got me scratching my head as well. I know Cassie mentioned it in her interview with Brian's sister that he, confirmed that he did come back. Yeah, why would you spend all that money to come back and do that? Makes no sense. What was he setting the table for? Who did he talk to? Who did he visit? That's why that digital footprint, those phone calls that were made, what did he do prior to? Why did he come home? What did he need a break from? So that's important. Hopefully, either these fugitive investigators or the homicide detectives, they're trying to figure out that, following those breadcrumbs that are being dropped or were dropped, I guess. And again, who was he talking to? For what reason did he want to come back home? They got to put that puzzle together and connect the dots, Vinny.
Now, August 23rd is where we left off the timeline. Now we're going to go forward just 4 days. It's just 4 days till August 27th when Brian and Gabby are reportedly spotted at the Mary Piglet's restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming. And this is when Gabby's last known communication with her family is on the 27th. Here's a witness who claims that she saw Brian and Gabby arguing in Mary Piglet's on the 27th.
She was hysterically crying. And she walked out and she was crying and she was staying on the sidewalk, and I was watching the whole thing unfold. He walked back in like 4 more times to talk to the manager and to tell the hostess off.
All right, I want to continue now on August 27th because we've got a map that we need to look at here, okay? We take a look at this map and you'll see where Mary Piglet's Mexican Grill is in Jackson, Wyoming. And then they've got to travel 31 miles, approximately 31 miles to get to Spread Creek. And that's where the Red, White, and Bethune YouTubers spotted the van on the side of the road. And again, this is close to where Gabby's remains were ultimately recovered. So if there's an argument, someone's livid, making a scene that other people are noticing, and now you've got to get back inside that van for a 31-mile drive. Mike King, that drive to me is the key to this whole case.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time to argue and blame. And, this domestic violence cycle is just so difficult for us to be able to understand. And Gabby herself, if she was involved in this domestic violence situation, probably isn't going to tell her parents, because that's admitting that she's made a poor choice in a companion. The same could stand for Brian. But, man, all this doubt keeps casting on Brian, who just disappears. But imagine what that 31-minute drive was like if you had just witnessed your companion screaming at the maitre d', at people, at you, and now all of a sudden you're stuck in a vehicle going to a place and there's nobody around but the two of you. I can't imagine.
Lenny, I think this is the key to what happened to Gabby. Whatever was going on for that 31-mile drive from the Mary Piglets up to the Spread Creek area.
Listening to the description of that witness, and it only escalated for those 30 miles. Absolutely. I mean, it's sad, and it sounds like that, it appears that's what happened. But and I agree, that's a long drive after you just got done shouting and screaming in a public restaurant with Gabby. So, who knows what that conversation was like, but it certainly didn't end well.
And from my perspective, that makes the van even more important, in terms of evidence and what is happening in these moments. And we know that investigators have the van and are able to go through the van, but they didn't get it for several weeks after this 31-mile trip. And I don't know if Gabby made any trips after that 31-mile trip. So, Lenny, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts about what you'd be looking for in that van?
Well, he took that van obviously by himself. He had plenty of time come back across country in Florida. He certainly had enough time to scrub that thing clean by the time anybody knew anything. So, what's left is evidence in that thing. It's tough. It's going to be tough to get anything out of there. Again, that was scrubbed clean, I'm sure. And I don't know what the FBI or any other law enforcement agencies were able to lift out of that van, but hopefully they got something.
Mike King, there was a trial I covered years ago out of New Jersey. Melanie McGuire, she was a nurse. She apparently murdered and dismembered her husband. And they believed that she did it in the bathroom in her home, but they couldn't find any evidence. But the evidence they used against her in that case was that it was too clean. The bathroom was too, like in a normal bathroom, you're going to find things, right? Because people take showers. There's just stuff everywhere. There was nothing there, and the jury understood that. You think this could be a case, if that van is too clean, that could perhaps be evidence of something?
Well, they certainly had time to do whatever they could to sanitize it. But bottom line is, I think the defense could pretty easily argue those two lived in that thing day in and day out for months. It's going to be filled with DNA unless there was blood.
But what if there's none?
But
what if there's none? They're living in the van, and then he comes back and it's crystal clean. They can't find a trace of Gabby's DNA in that van.
Yeah, that is so powerfully circumstantial, and you couldn't discount that, because you're right. It would be filled with DNA with two people living there. If you get back and it is pristine, that is really a weird red flag.
Okay, finally, protesters gathered outside the home of Brian Laundrie's sister Cassie yesterday. Cassie and her husband addressed the small crowd about that family camping trip that they took on September 6th in Fort DeSoto Park. The video was posted on TikTok.
We were at Fort DeSoto on the 6th. We got there at around 2 o'clock, and we left around 8 because the kids had school the next day.
On the 6th?
On the 6th. We only stayed for about 6 hours.
Who was there?
My mom, my dad, my brother. We had s'mores. We had dinner.
What did Brian say anything about
We
Gabby?
had our kids there. Nothing came up.
He didn't say anything about Gabby?
No, we've told the FBI everything.
Lenny DePaul, this is the situation, and we learned this from that conversation as well. That wasn't just Gabby. That was Aunt Gabby to Cassie's kids. And Aunt Gabby's not there. And I don't know. I don't quite understand how there's no conversation about Gabby at all. And maybe it's just the family getting together, grandma, grandpa with the kids. I know how that goes. What are your thoughts about at least that 6-hour window where the family is making s'mores?
Listening to Cassie's conversation, she's very forthcoming. I mean, there were no nonverbal communications, what we look for, scratch to the face or whatever, rolling your eyes. But I believe her. I mean, I believe what she's saying, and the reaction of the parents, and now the Bertolino, the attorney, telling the parents to stay away from their own daughter. None of that's making sense to me. I don't understand it. I don't know why that directive was given by the attorney. And she's frustrated. Cassidy and her family, the kids, they can't see, grandma, uncle, aunt, nobody now. So yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
Mike King, I'll give you the final word.
I don't know how you can have someone that lived in your house for a year. They were traveling for up to 3 months together. He returns home in her van, and we go camping and have s'mores, and we don't talk about her. Makes no sense to me.
All right. Lenny and Mike staying with us. We've got more to get to, including a case out of Oklahoma.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this segment, and I look forward to reading your comments down below. Please make sure that you take a moment and let me know if you think these injuries are a result of a domestic violence incident, or is this just a sandboarding accident gone bad? Thanks for supporting Profiling Evil. Please make sure you take a moment, hit that like and the subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you get notified on all of our videos like this one. And thanks again for supporting us. We'll look forward to seeing you soon at the next crime scene.